Do you believe in deja vu? Same things happen more than once. Well, here in C, we create them. It is called a loop. A loop statement allows you to execute codes or statement or blocks of statements multiple times. There are two loop statements in C, the while loop and the for loop. We will go to the while loop. The while loop statement is an extended of if statement. Unlike the if, where you can either do it or not, the while loop has another option, where you can repeat it as much as you want. In general, you repeat the codes inside the while loop 0 or more times. So the syntax of the while loop is while, then inside the open and close parenthesis is the condition, then an open curly brace, then the statements to execute while the condition is true. And then don't forget the close curly brace. The flow of this statement is while the condition is true, it will execute the while codes. If the condition is false, it will execute the next code after this looping statement. If you notice, I use the word while instead of if because the execution of the code inside the while loop will repeat as long as the condition is true. This is used in repeating the program while the user wants to use it again, also in counting, in summing up consecutive integers, and so much more. This looping statement has no specific use, unlike the do while loop and for loop. It means it's general use. Okay? So, let's go to a do while loop. This is a simpler version of a while loop. If the while loop repeats 0 or more times, the do while loop repeats 1 or more times. So it will repeat at least once. This means that the program will execute the do code, which is inside the do while, before performing the condition. Okay? The syntax for do while is the do keyword, then the open curly brace. Then inside of this is the statements to execute at least once while the condition is true. Then a close brace, then the while and the condition. But don't forget the semicolon this time. Okay? The flow of this statement is execute the code inside the do, then repeat the code while the condition is true. If the condition is false, it will execute the next code after this looping statement. This is usually used when repeating the program while the user don't want to exit or it will use it again. We will show some examples on the laboratory, or it can also be used while the input of the user is also invalid. Okay? Okay, so let's go to the for loop. It is a complicated version of a while loop. It is also repeating 0 or more times. Unlike with the while loop, it has two added statements inside the open and close parentheses. The first is the initialization code. This code only repeat once. Okay? Another added statement is the increment code. This repeat 0 or more times. It is located after the code inside the looping statement. The syntax for the for loop is the for keyword, then the open and close parentheses, and inside of it are the three parts of the for loop. First is the initialization, then a semicolon, then a condition, then a semicolon, and the increment. After that, there's an open curly brace, and the next are the statements to execute while the condition is true, and finally the close curly brace. So don't forget that initialization, condition, and increment are separated by semicolon. Okay? There is a while loop version of this looping statement, and the syntax for this is, first is the initialization statements, then the while loop. And inside of the while loop are the statements to execute while the condition is true, followed by the increment statements and the close curly brace. So note, there are 0 or more initialization and increments separated by comma inside a for loop. So you can have 0 or more than 1 initialization and also increment codes. The flow of this statement is you initialize the value first in the initialization code. Then it will check if the condition is true. So while the condition is true, it will execute the codes inside the for loop code. And it will also execute the increment. However, if the condition is false, it will execute the next code after this looping statement. The increment is usually by 1, but it can be any integer, positive or negative, except 0. So you can use +2, -2, and so on. Okay? So this is usually used in counting and summation of consecutive integers. To familiarize more on for loop, let's simplify its syntax. So here we have for, then I equals the start value, then semicolon, then I is less than or equal to its end value, then semicolon, and I plus plus. Then open curly, then the statements to execute, and the close curly brace. Though this syntax is not applicable on all uses of for loop, but this syntax is usually used on all basic for loops. There will be lots of examples on the laboratory, including the conversion from while loop to for loop. Nested loops. So this is a loop within a loop. It is also valid in C, like the nested ifs. Most of loops are for loop within a do while loop and a for loop within a for loop. The for loop within a do while loop is nothing special for me, but the for loop within a for loop is usually used for printing tables and manipulating a two-dimensional arrays. The outer for loop is for every rows, and the inner for loop is for every columns. Arrays will be discussed on our future lessons. Okay? So there are two statements used inside the loops. So these statements are helpful inside a looping statement, and they are the break and continue. These statements must be inside a decision making statements, usually if, because it will be useless if not. And also it must be inside a loop. Okay? So the break statement by the name itself, breaks or terminates a loop statement or a case in a switch statement. But we will focus on the loop statement only. So, when your life keeps repeating and if you want to enter a new life, then use break. Or if your love life keeps repeating and if you're tired of it, then use break also. Okay? The syntax of a break statement inside a looping statement is, first you have here the loop and the condition, then the open brace. And inside of it, there's statements to be execute before the break statement. So this will be not affected by the break. Then we have here the if, then the break condition. It is the condition to break, then the open curly brace, and the break keyword. Don't forget the semicolon, then the close curly brace. Then after that, there's the statements to be executed after the break. This time, it will be affected by the break because it will not be executed if the break condition is true. And finally, the close for the curly brace or the looping statement. Okay? So the flow of this statement is, if the break condition is true, it will exit the loop and will not execute all the statements after it inside that loop. It is usually used when the program encounters an error or there's a winner of the game, and so much more. It is also used to create a do-while loop using a while loop. Then the continue statement. Again, by the name itself, it continues the loop from its beginning without executing the remaining codes below the continue statement. It can be associated with a skip or a restart. So when you encounter a problem in your life, that you might use continue to skip the problem and start again. If you think your love life will start to break apart, you can use continue to skip the breaking apart and start again. Maybe, okay? So the syntax of using a continuous statement inside a looping statement is the same thing, the loop condition, the loop and condition. Then the inside of it is the statements or statements before the continue. So this is also not affected by the continue. Then the continue condition and the continue keyword. Okay, then the statements after the continue condition. It is affected by the continue if the continue condition is true. Okay? So the flow of this statement is, if the continue condition is true, it will not execute all the statements after this condition inside the loop, and it will go back to the beginning part of the loop code. Okay? So it is usually used when you encounter a problem but don't want to terminate the program, or a loser is eliminated from the game, and so much more. Finally, C shows you that forever exists. It is also called as infinite loop. You can try to run it. So we have two. First is the for, and the other one is a while. Okay, don't forget the main. The two codes are examples of a forever loop or an infinite loop. If you try this, press Ctrl C on your computer and the return button of your phone to stop the program. I bet you are confused. Don't worry, Laboratory is to the rescue. For now, just answer the assignment number 5. Thank you and goodbye.